From the Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors, you're listening to Tenets in Common, a podcast sharing stories, motivation, and insight into the real estate industry.
Very excited for this session of Tenets in Common. We're here with Bill Jakes and President Christopher Wilson. We're going to have a fun conversation. I've got my little notes here because I've already been called a Yankee because I come from Sumner County. So
well, it's up north. That's up north.
Like Andrew Jackson around Old Hickory Boulevard so people would shoot me. But here I am. And I am so thankful that you had the opportunity in your busy schedule to come back and chat with us.
Well, I'm so thankful for the invite. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And you brought us gifts. So the key to my heart's a gift.
Yeah.
And this book is amazing. When the recording wasn't on, he was telling us about the history. And so I'm going to give you the microphone to talk to us about this book.
Well, I don't mind telling you a little bit more about my latest creation. This book is an interesting little creation. I don't know why I'm calling it a creation, but when you say you published a book, you think I did something creative. What I really did here is creatively take a stash of letters that I found, and a friend of mine helped me transcribe them, and I published them as they were written in 1863. It's really weird how they came into my possession, though, and this is an interesting real estate tidbit because this is a situation where personal property conveyed with real estate. These letters were written by William Wendel and his father, David Wendel. His parents are here on the front cover of the book. That's David Diedrich Wendel and Sarah Keeble Wendel. And anyway, they lived in the 100 block of North Spring Street during the Civil War. Their house was literally next door to where Beckman's Drugs is right now.
Okay.
Right there. They lived right behind the public square, and they owned pretty much that whole plot of land. And what happened, apparently, is after the Battle of Stones River, when the Union Army occupied Murfreesboro, all the men, the son, the dad, the brothers, either joined the war effort or were in hiding. They had to get out of town. The women maintained their homes, and it just so happens that their home, their brothers that lived across the corners, their homes were all occupied by the Union Army and turned into headquarters. So this series of letters that I found, there were 85 of them, come back and forth between mom and the dad and the sons and various cousins and uncles, and they're all from the time frame of 1863 during the occupation of Murfreesboro. So it gives you a really amazing portrait of what these families were going through during the Civil War.
How did you find these?
It's so crazy. Okay, so I bought my house that I'm currently living in, which I lived across the street literally for 10 years prior. When my family started growing, one of my neighbors was ready to move and said, "You need this house. This is a perfect family house, and this is where you should move." And I said, "Well, let's strike a deal. Let's do that." And I had been living in the house for maybe a month, okay? And there, at a previous auction, when the house had sold, they'd emptied the contents. The previous family, prior to the guy who sold it to me, had been there for 50 plus years. 2 generations of family. Folks that bought it before me had only been there for a couple of years. They bought it at auction. During the auction, they emptied the contents of the house and sold everything that they had in it, right? Except for a bunch of old Christmas decorations. And when I bought the house and did the tour of it, I said, "Don't worry, leave all that junk. I'll clean it out when I have time," right? So fast forward, I've been living in the house for a few weeks, told the wife, "I'm going to get my flashlight and we'll go up in the attic and look at all these old-timey Christmas decorations, and maybe I can find something to use, and it'll be special, you know." About 10 minutes into it, my flashlight hit this wooden box in the corner, and it was dovetailed on the edges, and I'm like, "Ooh, I'm a woodworker. That means it's a special box, you know." And I went over and pulled a piece of newspaper off. I dug my hand down in the middle, and I pulled out a letter, and I immediately noticed the stamp was weird. And I looked at it, and it's Jefferson Davis on the stamp. So I'm like, I just found something really cool. So I grabbed the whole box, forget about the Christmas stuff, and head downstairs and eventually realized what I had. It only took about an hour before I had the aha moment of exactly how these letters ended up in my house. So being a big history buff of Murfreesboro, I have all this old photo collection of Murfreesboro, and one of my favorite buildings on the corner of Main Street and Church Street was the old Barton and Ridley block, and there was Henry's Florist there as long as I remember. He bought that building in the early 70s. One of the most prominent, beautiful buildings on the square. Well, I have an old picture of it that used to say Wendel Drugs across the side. Wendel Drugs sold to A.L. Smith in 1909. And it was A.L. Smith Drugstore, one of the longest standing businesses on the square. It just so happens the house I live in belonged to the son of A.L. Smith. And Herbert, the son, had run the store when they shut it down in 1970, and they finally retired the business. Okay. So these letters are from the Wendel family. They obviously left them in the drugstore when they sold in 1909. And when Herbert shut the business down, he had an addition built onto our house. And in the attic were these letters. So when he retired, he brought them home and he stashed them in his new attic. And there they were left for me to find. And what a stash it was, really. So David Diedrich Wendel, the guy on the front of the cover here, a lot of the documents were his. There were more than just the letters. He was a county court clerk. He was a really prominent citizen that was involved with local government. His father was the second mayor of Murfreesboro, kind of helped set up the local government. So they were really involved with all the prominent families in town and businesses. And so there's just this massive stash of paperwork. But the book, anyway, focuses on the 85 letters during the Civil War. And I thought those were the most important to kind of get out there.
That is absolutely amazing. Now, would you call it the Civil War or the War of Northern Aggression?
It's Civil War. It was Civil War.
It's funny. I published a previous book in 2006, and one of the things I learned at the time was you always use the same terminology throughout the book. And so I called it the War Between the States at that time.
I forgot about that.
And stuck with it because wasn't nothing civil going on.
No, it's very true. That's another one of those semantics kind of things, and you're right, actually. The question about that, you say it almost facetiously, but it's one of those things that it's still a debated, topic.
Oh, it is. It is. I mean, now, honestly, if you want to look at the perspective of the people who were living here, they felt invaded. They felt that this army had come to them and brought the fight to them in their daily life. So, it is difficult to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but by reading their own words, it kind of puts you there a little bit.
And we kind of take that for granted for being Tennesseans, because we get little smatterings of Civil War stories, whether it be in history class or just driving around. And anywhere in the state of Tennessee, you're within an arm's reach of something that happened. Mm-hmm. And for those that are moving into Murfreesboro from out of the state or country, and even for those here, I mean, it's amazing the stories that center around this special geographic part of the state.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to fathom, really. But one of the things we boast about Middle Tennessee is probably the exact reason this was such an important area. We're 8 miles, or we're within an 8-hour drive of 75 or 80% of the population of the United States. So it's a key hub area, and that's exactly, it was a supply depot stop. The railroad had just been built through this area a few years prior, and so it's tactically an important place that did really turn the tide of the war. It just so happens right after the Battle of Murfreesboro that the North got repeating arms as well. They actually got shell casings and guns that could fire multiple times. So anyway, the tourism dollars that come into Murfreesboro to this day because of that Civil War history is still pretty massive.
Well, also, one of the things that I'm a huge history buff. I love it. I have come to hear you speak at the Historical Society and different things because I do. If anybody ever wants to or has ever said, I'd love it if Chris quit talking, have Bill be across the table. I'll sit here and just listen all day. But some things I didn't know, and it was weird where you'll find out things. There's walking through the courthouse. We had a meeting with a few of the commissioners and Mayor Ketron and to talk about those development tax things. And when I was walking through the courthouse and reading some of the banners, you're finding out that Murfreesboro and Tennessee parts of it swapped sides a couple times, or at least one swap back and forth, between the Confederacy and the Union Army and what side they were going to take based on. And if you correct me if I'm wrong, it was on a couple votes at one point in time. Yeah. Made the difference about what they did. It was like one or two votes.
There was no consensus. Mm-mm. This was a split issue and it was more than just Tennessee. It was a lot of states that just, didn't want it to be involved. And quite frankly, slavery was not something that a lot of people cherished. It was considered by a lot of the church members to be wrong and to be terrible. And and this family in particular, obviously a prominent family, obviously owned slaves, but it's really, I don't want to be an apologist for the horrors of the South during this era, but it's very enlightening to read the terms of affection when they refer to these folks, when they refer to their servants. They never use the terminology slave, obviously, but William, the son who's off at war at 18 years old, every letter in here where he writes home, he says, "Send my love to Joshua." And I figured out finally that Joshua was one of the family slaves that was his age. He begs his family to send Joshua to be with him so that he can help them cook, and because they have a terrible cook, and Joshua's such a better cook, and it's just crazy to grasp, and so I'm one of these people that think the more you know, the better you can decipher things. And so I just felt like that's part of why this was so important to share.
What did you discover at the end of your journey with these letters?
Where did it lead, really? Maybe just a better understanding of some of the founders of our town. These folks were merchants in East Tennessee, had been there since before Franklin County was created in North Carolina, and it became Tennessee later after the Watauga thing, the convention. But the merchants came to this town very early on. Even my Kelton ancestors that I mentioned in a previous podcast, they came here to set up shop, to do business. And so...
And a lot of places in Tennessee look like they're Irish and Scottish homelands.
Yeah, this family actually was of German descent, but obviously, most of this area was settled by Irish descent, and of course, a lot of it is because of who fought where during the Revolutionary War. Most of this area was divvied up as land grants to soldiers who had fought in the Revolutionary War. Not many of those folks who got the land grants actually moved onto the land. As a matter of fact, the Murfree that the town's named after, his kids came here, but he lived in Williamson County and is buried in Williamson County. So, the history really, it's all founded around war.
It is. 24,000 young souls were killed here in Murfreesboro.
Yes. And that's a great point. I actually even thought about bringing that up because in contrast to the 24,000 casualties, the population of this town was roughly 3,000 at the time.
It's crazy.
So how are you going to deal with 24,000 casualties? And there's 3,000 or 4,000 of you.
And I was reading when I was trying to get ready to be able to speak articulately with you is that some of the bodies that were interred were dug back up and moved, and some went to the Evergreen Cemetery.
Yeah, the mass grave in Evergreen Cemetery was essentially 4 or 5 other burying grounds. One of them, most notably, was out South Church Street, near where Jennings and Ayers Funeral Home is there, across the street from where the post office is. I found the deeds for that cemetery. I've researched that one. That was one of the cemeteries that was dug up and reinterred in the Confederate Circle. And so Confederate Circle in Evergreen is essentially a huge mass grave. Another, if you read John Spence's diaries from the Civil War era, he lived where a popular title company is Lawyers Land and Title. The Spence house was that house.
Okay.
And right next door was the Sewell College, a women's college that the Union Army used as a hospital. And he writes in his diaries that there was a mass grave of Confederates out in the backyard of that school next door. And so there's another one that was dug up and reinterred. So sad stuff, you know.
There's so much importance here in Murfreesboro, geographic center of the state. Was originally named Canonsburg.
That's yes, that's the history as we know it. There's some debate on that topic, but I'm no expert on that. So I'm just a listener when it comes to those debates. I try to learn all I can.
Chris was sharing with me. Take us to Jakestown.
Oh, Jakestown. Okay. Well, you know, East Main Street's kind of the most prominent part of town, but if you travel on down East Main Street and you get to an area where Bud Mitchell's store is, you might notice there's a Jakes Road, and not far from there, there's a Jakes Avenue, and that's actually where my first ancestors in Rutherford County settled. Before that, they had been in Bedford County and moved here about 5 generations ago and settled out that area. And if you look at the old maps from the 80s and 90s, it was still on the old maps when they still made paper travel maps. You know, that area was known as and called Jakestown.
I still thought that was the coolest thing when you showed me one of the maps that you had.
Yeah.
I was like, that's pretty cool. Like that shows you the lineage of it. You said something in our previous episode that I made a note on because I wanted to ask you about it. We were talking about the different ages for the historical tax abatement kind of thing. And you talked about upwards of 150 years.
Right.
Are there still houses standing? And if so, like what's the prominence of those? And can you tell us anything about some of that?
Absolutely. We do still have quite a good number of antebellum homes in the downtown area. And a few around the county scattered about. There's some in Blackman, some out. We've lost a lot of them, obviously, through the years because of development. But probably the greatest concentration is downtown Murfreesboro. If you go along North Academy Street, there's the Woman's Club. There's Miss Alice Ray's home. Across the street from her is another one. Corner of Burton and Academy. There's a string all the way through there of homes that are over 160 years old now that were all witnesses to the Civil War.
That's just, it's amazing. One of the things that I've always enjoyed about living in some of the southern states, or even then if you get to visit like the northeastern states, is the historical aspect of it, the architectural differences, just the stories honestly behind it. And that's, I think, one of the things for me, at least personally, the reason I love history so much is the storytelling aspect of it. So much of our society and culture originated around people being able to share stories of what happened. And now we're blessed enough to be able to have things like books and things that, but it was storytelling. That was a big part of it. So,
not to forget too, Oakland's mansion that is down there at the end of Manny Avenue. That was freshly remodeled right before the war broke out. And, there was encampments there. The Union Army camped, the Michigan troops camped on the lawn there. And there was a battle there. Forced raids started there right off of Highland. And so the history's deep. And I tell you, as a side note, one of my hobbies that I like to dabble with over the years is metal detecting.
I was just going to ask you about this.
And
so
that's on my notes.
Yeah, he's big at it. So he says dabble. He's being modest.
I got mostly into it really hard during when they were building Medical Center Parkway. I got to do what I call scavenger archaeology. So you don't really want to disturb relics that are in the ground for the sake of history. You leave as much there as you can. But when I know a site's going to be developed, when it's going to be taken out of context and potentially lost forever, that's when I really love to go. So I've gotten permission from a lot of these developers through the years and went and dug just tons and tons of relics from the Civil War. And the thing is, all over downtown, that Oakland's plantation, even in yards of neighbors, I find this stuff everywhere. I mean, it was just littered. These relics were littered all throughout our town. and still exist. People are digging stuff up every day.
We've got some empty bookshelves right here if you want to.
Yeah, put on a little display.
A little display.
Well, let me ask you, because correct me if I'm wrong, there's a story behind even when they did some work at the Oakland mansion about when they were having to dig up some pipes or whatever it was, they were having to do some excavating. Weren't you part of the group that got permission to go out there and dig in that?
I did a find. I was on the board at Oakland's for a number of years, and we approved a drainage project where we were getting the water from the gutters of the home we were going to dig a pipeline so that it would run out towards the wetlands instead of the water being around the foundation. We all know as realtors how that's a bad thing. So while we were moving dirt, I approached the board and I said, please let me do some metal detecting, because we could potentially take relics out of context, which the archaeologists can't do anything with that. So while I was doing it, metal detecting, I found a $50 that was like $17.97 or something like that, and it was in beautiful condition. Of course, donated it to Oakland's. Everything that was found that day went back into Oakland's collection, and they have it as part of their permanent collection now. So,
what are some of the other things that you found that you just that geek out a little bit? Like what are some of the stuff that you found that's really cool?
One of my favorites ever was when they were building the hotels right next to the interstate off of Medical Center Parkway. I had been hunting that area every day I got a chance, and one day I had a 2-hour break for lunch, and I just went out and just started hitting the dirt, and ended up digging a hole about 2 feet deep for this signal that I just couldn't get to, and it turned out to be a 6-pound Confederate cannonball. Every time I get on the interstate or get off the interstate, I look at that spot where I found that cannonball.
So if you go to the Stones River battlefield, are you allowed to take a metal detector?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely not.
They're big. Yeah.
If you get caught metal detecting on federally protected land, not only can you be fined and jailed, they'll take your truck, they'll take your metal detector, they'll confiscate everything. It is highly illegal.
I've never done it.
Yeah.
No, but it's a good question though, because people hear about it sometimes, and they, with little knowledge, will go out and just start doing it. And with this kind of stuff, you do have to be very careful, because even if it's not federally protected, a lot of times it's privately owned, and therefore you have other issues there too. So
Smith & Wesson protected.
Yeah,
yes, there's a lot of that around here.
Yeah,
and trespassing's a big no-no, and digging other people's land is truly a big no-no. And sadly, not many people recognize this. A lot of folks will just go out and start digging, and that's just not the way to do it.
Well, like you said though too, there's an aspect to that, the respect for history, and if it's altered, tampered with dirt, that's probably not the place to do it anyways. All of yours, and you and I've had this conversation because I was really intrigued by it. You got special permission from developers on land that they were about to bring big earth movers out, and none of that stuff would have been there still.
That's right.
And
I still try to take it to the next level too. Instead of collecting this stuff by condition or how cool a piece is, I always box it based on the location. I put latitude, longitude numbers on the box, trying to preserve it for history's sake. I will never, ever, and I have never sold a relic. I don't believe in it. I don't think that we should trade relics like that. It's not something that people should be buying and selling. It's part of our history. We kind of all own it, and it's my plan and my hope that when I'm done with it, my kids will see that it's donated to the right place. And we may have a Murfreesboro museum. The courthouse is finally our first step towards a local museum. The current Mayor Ketron helped turn the ground floor of the courthouse into a Murfreesboro museum recently. So.
Is the courthouse that's on the square, was that the state capitol?
No.
Where was the state capitol?
The state capitol, when it was here, the courthouse was here. It burned during that time, and they met in the Presbyterian Church. Presbyterian Church was where the old city cemetery is now on Vine Street. And that was originally the Presbyterian Church and burying ground. And then during the Civil War, that church was dismantled. The building materials were used. A lot of the bricks and things were used to make chimneys for the little huts that the Union troops had all around the square. I mean, they scavenged this town pretty hard. So it was literally, they took a whole church down for its materials in that case.
I have a feeling there's some karma there
I
somewhere.
know.
I'm like, I don't know what it is, but I don't know if I'd be brave enough to do that one. So.
Actually, speaking of that, the front room of the Wendel's home was used as a meeting hall for the state legislature during the time that Murfreesboro was the capital. So these people's house was also one of their meeting places.
And where is this house? If I wanted to just go see the location, is that?
It's 123 North Spring Street. Okay. So if you were standing, essentially, that's like, Beckman's is the landmark. There, the Methodist Church property that's under development, it's the block towards Main Street from that Methodist Church block there. So just behind the public square.
I was also trying to get prepared for you. James K. Polk's wife was from Murfreesboro.
Yes, Sarah Childress. And I mentioned one of the houses earlier, that row of antebellums. I said Miss Alice Ray's house. It's on the corner of Academy and Lytle. That's also known as the Childress House. And that was owned by the fellow that Sarah Polk, I think she was, married.
Okay.
That's awesome.
And then Bradley Academy ended up becoming a black school and a black community center.
Yes. But actually, that building was built many years later. The original Bradley Academy, where Andrew Jackson supposedly had some sort of classes, was closer to where Walter Hill is today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's some history that just kind of came about in the last decade that we figured out. A lot of folks believed for many years that it was where the current site of Bradley is, but that was added later. And that building was truly built for the black community, and fortunately is preserved and celebrated to this day. Yeah, Miss Ray Seddon. She lived right over near MTSU for most of her childhood.
Now, I'm not familiar with the sports writer Grantland Rice.
Grantland's, I can't think of his quote. It's not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, there you go. That would explain why that came up in your search.
And then the wife of General Douglas MacArthur.
Yes, Jean Faircloth. If you're sitting in my office,
I feel like we're playing Jeopardy.
Yeah, seriously, he knows. That's what I'm saying. He knows it all. It's crazy.
If you're sitting in my office at the corner of Highland and Lytle, right across the street where the Rutherford Hospital used to sit, that's where the Faircloth sat, right on the opposite corner from my office. And Jean was born in 1899, and she died in 2001. She lived in 3 different centuries.
And to think about, she went through electricity and that coming into Tennessee. A lot of people just had one light bulb, and then you've got television, and you've got air travel, and all the
She
things.
saw it all. Space travel. Yeah.
That's when you think about that part of it, that's pretty overwhelming almost. Like it really is. Like we sit here and we get excited about, we're carrying a cell phone that was bigger than has more capacity than the computer that sent us to space. But to think about that, you went through both world wars. You went through, like you said, space travel. Like people used to think that was like that was sci-fi. That was insane. There was no. So
Hard to imagine growing up with horse-drawn carriages.
One more question.
Yeah.
And you may have plenty.
I'm enjoying this.
I'm geeking out.
that's what I told you. This was going to be dangerous because
It's become Stump Bill Jakes here.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Most fabled haunted place in Murfreesboro.
Ooh, that's tough. That's a tough one. So I follow some of the ghost stories. I don't know that I could say which is the most haunted, but there's a lovely story of Nancy Morris's house. Nancy lives at the corner of Manny and East Main Street.
Is she a spook, or is she still living?
She's still alive.
Okay, so thank you, Miss Morris, for being here.
Yeah, when she was remodeling her house in the 80s, she said that in the attic she found a pair of child's shoes by a dormer ventilation area in the attic. Thought they were cool and moved the shoes. And that very night, she said she woke up to the smell of coffee, and she thought somebody was brewing coffee or something. And this coffee smell kept happening night after night, and she couldn't figure it out. Well, apparently she did some research, and she read that coffee smell is an indication that there are ghosts in your house, and said that it really freaked her out. She found the shoes. She put the shoes back in the attic where they belong.
Nope, I'm out.
So sorry, Miss Annabelle.
And
What's that movie, Annabelle?
I'm out.
Everything changed, and it went back to normal. And I assume those shoes are still in that attic.
I tell people all the time, if you see me running, don't ask questions, just join in. You would see me running. So
I kind of want to see you run.
Well, that's why it doesn't happen very often. I actually do have a couple things before we do wrap up. You know, you do know so much about this, and we've had a lot of fun conversations. I enjoy every one of them because I do geek out on some of the history aspects of things. But do you have any like little factoids, little tidbits that you have found excessively interesting that just maybe aren't common knowledge, that aren't, you know, widely spread out there, but just for you, you're like, I'm kind of intrigued by this, like for whatever reason? Any unknowns, you know, kind of things, or you know, you'll hear about the stories of like, you hear the rumor, but no one can quite prove what happened, you know, that kind of concept?
I'm sure there are dozens of things here that I'm probably not going to be able to recall right at the moment.
Who shot JR?
I don't know, Bobby. You know, the world's largest cedar bucket is something that burned. It was a relic that burned a few years back. They did rebuild it. It is now larger than the original one. They built it back slightly bigger so that we could have the brand new record. Nothing too special about that. The bucket did appear in a World's Fair, and they filled it with beer and served beer out of it.
Was that the one in Knoxville?
I don't think so. But yeah, I'm foggy on that detail. Gosh, we hit a few of the statistics earlier that I find really amazing, like the casualties of the Civil War versus the population of the town. Just crazy. You know, by the time we got a hospital in this town in the 20s, you know, there was still just 5,000 or 6,000 people living in the city of Murfreesboro. Even I think it was 1970, there was only 30,000 people in the city of Murfreesboro. So now we're up 175, 200,000 people roughly. So
in Murfreesboro,
in the city,
in the actual city. Yeah, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. There's a lot of areas that are kind of pseudo county islands or county peninsulas that have Murfreesboro addresses, but they're not even counted in the Murfreesboro population. So it's actually quite a bit more extensive than that, even if you're in the immediate surroundings. So yeah, I'm sure I'm going to think of more tidbits as soon as I walk out of here. Like I said, we've had a lot of conversations about it, and I do appreciate it all. Give people a little bit if they want to get your books. Oh, that's the other thing I do want to talk to you about. So this isn't your first one. I have one of your previous ones, which I'm hugely intrigued by because you actually did a collection of postcards.
Yeah, I started collecting old Murfreesboro postcards many years ago, and about 2004 or 5, I had the idea. I was actually traveling in Charleston, South Carolina, and saw a book through Arcadia Publishing. It was based on historic postcards and the history of that town. I said, I really should do that for Murfreesboro, and contacted the publisher, and they agreed, and I put one together, published it in 2006. And quite frankly, if you want a lot of little tidbits and weird details, I filled that book with it because I had a really set sort of template that I had to go by with this publisher. And I was only allowed, so many words per picture. So I really focused in on all those little tidbits and facts and numbers and statistics in there.
Which is still one that I like to pull up and look at because there's a lot of neat little stuff. And some of the, like I said, the really old buildings, original buildings, some of the progression of some of the buildings. It's amazing what postcards will actually, how they can tell you a story of an area.
Yeah, picture postcards came into play around the turn of the century. About 1905 or 6 are the first real picture postcards we saw in Murfreesboro. Prior to that, they were just blanks. They were just a quick and easy communication method, Obviously, letter writing was very popular back in the day, and this was like a quick telegram sort of thing. But those pictures are wonderful, and a lot of those buildings are long gone, and some of these postcards are the only images of some of the buildings that I've ever found. So.
Well, where can people get them? If they want to get this book, if they want to take a look at that one, where are some places they can pick them up?
So my first one that was published in 2006, just called Murfreesboro in Historic Postcards, and you can find that all around town. Most of the drugstores, corner CVS's, and things like that carry it. You can find it at the Battlefield, at Oakland's gift shop. It's readily available online. You can order it through Arcadia. You can even find it on eBay. A little different story with my current book. This is 100% self-published. I have not put it in any stores locally. Through Facebook, I have posted a couple of times a PayPal link where you can buy one directly. I don't charge any shipping. They retail for $35, and I'll send one directly to you if you want to find that PayPal link. Or people can just reach out to me. Now, also, I've got them in the gift shop at Oakland's Historic House Museum. That's at 900 North Manny Avenue. I keep them stocked in there. I had some at Country Gourmet. I don't know that they have anymore. So the best way to get a copy of this book is directly through me. Only 1,000 copies, and that's all I plan to publish.
Well, there you go. There's that. Well, one of the things that we're doing is our guest, I'm going to hit you with 3 completely random questions. First thing that comes off the head, and then just answer them, and they'll be a little bit different. Since we're talking about books, I'm going to actually do this one for you. What is a book or a couple books that you've read through, and maybe we focus on the last 10 years of your real estate career that have been essentially highly beneficial for you that you recommend to maybe someone new to entrepreneurialness or whatever it is? What's something you got?
That's a great question. Well, in my young life, one of the most influential books I ever read, it's still one of my top favorites, is The Art of War, Sun Tzu. It's weird. You have to pick it apart and learn the lessons, but it's very into Zen sayings and thoughtful sayings, and there's a lot of knowledge hidden inside the Sun Tzu teachings. So Art of War is right up there at the very top of my list. And probably, it's funny, I did a little talk with the Murfreesboro Young Professionals last year. They wanted me to come speak about a book. And I'll say probably for my career, the greatest book I ever read, and I still refer back to often, is The Millionaire Next Door. So many amazing lessons about building wealth and becoming secure in your job, and it's outdated and needs to be revised. Actually, I think they did revise it a few years ago. I still got my old ruffled up copy from way back when, but so many valuable lessons can be found in it. I love little tidbits instead of a long drawn out story. I love the little hot bites, and you can find so many of those in either of those books.
Awesome.
I'm still trying to find the squirrel and highlights, so maybe after that I can go to art.
Yeah, we're gonna get you upgraded here. Okay, next one here for you. If you could have a billboard made and put anything you wanted on it, any saying that you want to get out to the public, what would that saying be?
Wow, this is a good question. If there's any message that I try to convey in business, it's just that I'm trustworthy. I don't know how I would put that on a billboard, but I live my life making sure I treat people equally and always tell the truth to anybody, no matter what. And I guess if there's any image that
don't start with let's not get
if there's any image I would ever want to portray, it's just the fact that you can trust me.
And I'll speak to that. Yeah, you, like I said, you were one of the first people that I kind of met in the office when we worked together, and it's been that way ever since. So, all right, last one. I'm gonna ask you the question I hate getting asked the most.
Oh,
what's your spirit animal?
My spirit animal, it's got to be a hawk. I've always identified with raptor birds. Yeah,
love it.
I like hawks.
Absolutely,
I like eagles. Like them all.
Bill, I cannot thank you enough. I greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you taking out the time to do this, letting us pick your brain, ask you questions, stump you where we could, which we couldn't. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Hopefully the listeners and folks will gain something from our ramblings.
Yeah. And like I said, if you want to hear more, you want to see more, he's constantly posting on his on Facebook. He's got his company page, Bill Jakes Realty, and his personal page where he'll give you information about history. You can see, you just did one about the new zones that they were kind of doing. The city of Murfreesboro kind of did or Rutherford County did their zone release.
Yeah, the city of Murfreesboro just released their new future land use map. So that's something all Realtor members really should familiarize themselves with. If you want to know what an area the city wants it to become, look at their future use map.
Yeah, so he's always willing to share info. He's a great conversationalist, great storyteller. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, my friend.
Thank you. That's going to do it for us. Tenets in Common.
Thank you for listening to Tenets in Common. Find out more about the association and upcoming events at www.mtar.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at MidTN Realtors. Duplication or publication of this podcast is strictly prohibited without the written consent of the Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors. Until next time.